a transformed, a united, and a prosperous South Africa began to materialize. It was a moment of truth, of triumph of good over evil. We celebrate this day because it is a constant reminder that in the end, righteous will always prevail over evil. This day also reminds us that our democracy is a product of immense sacrifices. President Mandela also participated in various forums, and I can see also the former ministers participated in these forums, including one of the ANC conferences in 1992, which adopted a perspective or a policy document called Ready to Govern. This policy document affirmed the various policy positions of the ANC with regards to correctional services, with regards to the role of the independency of the National Prosecuting Authority, and with regard to the independence of the judiciary. It is this policy perspective which laid a policy and a foundation for our constitutional democracy and for the Constitution, in order for us to reconstruct this nation in the vision of the Freedom Charter. We need not just be a capable state, but a state which is going to frown upon any lack of ethics. 25 years into our constitutional democracy, we have built these institutions as envisaged by the Ready to Govern and the Freedom Charter. This moment of renewal in our country calls all of us to stand in these principles and also in the values of Nelson Mandela. Through his own conduct, President Mandela assured the nation and the rest of the world that anyone, regardless of their social standing, must subject himself or herself to any judicial scrutiny or judicial process. In the matter between President of the Republic of South Africa, which was Nelson Mandela at the time, and the South African Football Union and others, in 1999, Mandela subjected himself to cross-examination at a time when he was a sitting president. This was a clear example of what is meant by the supremacy of a constitution. It was also a firm commitment to the Freedom Charter's injunctions, which says, all shall be equal before the law. One can imagine the dismay the former President Mandela will today express if he were to wake up to see the manner in which certain people cast aspersions and chant irresponsible statements against the judiciary. If a man who enjoyed so much pain and sacrificed a great deal of his life for the realization of our court processes and the constitutional democracy, there can never be any sort of justification towards unwarranted attacks on the judiciary and the circumvention of the rule of law by any section of our society. There are checks and balances for those who are not satisfied by decisions of our courts. People can appeal, can review, can do anything which is relevant and defined by the constitutions. Decisions of judges are not above criticism. Judges criticize each other, academics criticize judgments, but it is done in a fair, balanced, and informed manner by facts and the law. It is not an unwarranted personal attacks on the person of the judges, conspiracies, and other unfounded allegations, which are just aimed to derail and denigrate the personalities of judges. Judiciary must be anyone who does that personal degradation of the judiciary must be condemned by all citizens of our country. We must never allow our country to descend to levels of other countries where police, prosecutors, or even the judiciary, for them to do their job, they must negotiate with drug cartels and criminals. We must never degenerate to lawlessness or a banana republic. The consequences of this area, of this kind of behavior, are palpable and will lead to catastrophic disaster. When that happens, institutions that are intended to serve the interest of society become compromised, and this, as we have seen, has resulted in complete breakdown in some of our institutions and even paralyzed or crippled them, like in the provision of electricity, water supply, reliable trains, and the airlines in our country. As a country, we must use this moment of renewal, as led by President Ramaphosa, to reform institutions and the whole architecture of the state to serve the people, to work for economic growth and rebuild the credibility of our criminal justice system. The rule of law must reign supreme. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an era where we will not be silent to allow falsehoods to triumph. We will draw inspiration from Nelson Mandela and reconstruct this nation in the image of the Freedom Charter. We will not be derailed any longer. The dreams of our forebearers can no longer be deferred. In Mandela, we see a continuous cause for justice. We owe it to his memory to ensure that society live up to the ideals that define the South Africa that he fought for so hard. In conclusion, let us remember that Mandela said when he walked out of this prison, "As I walked out of the door towards the gate that will lead to my freedom, I knew that if I did not leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I will still be in prison." We must be able to work to renew our country, to move and forge forward for the next 25 years, for the betterment of all South Africans and for all humanity. I want to welcome you here and say this is now a new correctional center. It's no longer the prison that Nelson Mandela left. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'd like to welcome Deputy Minister Sokyu. Thank you so much for... It's actually the Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture. Yes.
Yeah, welcome.
You know, you confused the heck out of me. I was like, what just happened? Because DM will then do the a few words of welcome also here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silo. You are forgiven. You will remember that before me, the Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture was Meki Sokyu. But I'm not Meki Sokyu. My name is Notsabe Mafu. I'm the Deputy Minister for Sports, Arts and Culture, not the Arts and Culture. Good morning. Molweni. I want to hear what Silo said that you don't answer back. Molweni. Thank you very much. To the leadership of the Mandela Foundation, the Board of Trustees, the leadership of the reception committee at the time. I hear you've got many titles. You were the former ministers, you were the reception committee, you were the leadership of the United Democratic Front. All these are your titles. And I think it's important that we must say all of those titles so that people know who we are talking about. It's a very important day to everybody who is here, the media and the international guests. We go back 30 years. If I remember very well, it was a Sunday, the day that Madiba walked out of this house, and the country was on a standstill. Those of us that were old enough, not like Ronald was still very young. At least us, we were old enough, Ronald, to be part of this process. Not old enough, but not young like you. It was a turning point in the history of this country. And it's important that as we sit here, remembering and knowing what Madiba did for the country of South Africa on that particular day, by just the mere walking out of prison, that he actually changed the country for the better. The Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, in collaboration with Justice and Correctional Services, as well as Public Works, working together with the Nelson Mandela Foundation. It is important that this building, this house that we are at right now, at some point in time, it will become a heritage that even those that are still to be born, we will be able to come here and actually know the history of our country. And we do then commit to make sure that, as the custodians of making sure that arts and culture in the country, historical events, historical buildings, this will happen. So that at the end, all of us will find solace when we come here, and we will find strength and making sure that as we move forward, building South Africa for the better, even when at times we forget where we come from and we do things that might destroy the unity of this country, you remind yourselves when you walk into this house that there are people that sacrificed their lives for this country to be where it is today. It is important that as we celebrate these 30 years of Madiba being released from prison, we also remember that it is not just about celebration. It is about each and every one of us. What is it that we can do for the country, not what the country can do for us? So that at the end, we are actually, all of us individually, can sit in comfort and understand that I did my best. You take from what Madiba did for this country. Of course, we can't do what he did, but we can just take a fraction of what he did for us to be here, for us to be even standing here, for us to be even called ministers and deputy ministers, because the sacrifice that he did and the sacrifice that he made for both his family and his life, so that all of us will actually talk of a better South Africa and a better life. We need to make sure that we harness that. We work together. We actually get out of the things that when you do, you know that it can actually take this country backwards. We make sure that we work and actually take the country to a better level to where he had left it. I thought it's important that as the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, we commit to making sure that heritage of this place, we are committing that it will be done. And that working with all the stakeholders, particularly the Nelson Mandela Foundation, because Ronald, this is his property. We have to make sure that we get permission, but Public Works as well. That process is actually unfolding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DM. You touched on a very important subject, that the house needs to be preserved. And we have to work together as the four stakeholders to make sure that this house is preserved. I want to welcome two other members of the committee. I don't know how they got Madiba to that venue, but we now understand why he got lost. Because apparently they were calling around to say, where's the gate? Thank you very much. I apparently went on the phone calling everybody here to check where's the gate. How did you get Madiba there? Now this explains it all. Why Madiba started at 8. So I want to just note that the office just keeps reminding me that we should use hashtag Mandela Returns. Then I said, but these are old people. They don't even know what a tweet is. So it's for Twitter, and Twitter is that bird, and Facebook. So if you can use Mandela Returns, hashtag Mandela Returns. So if you can do that, I want to hand over to Tsepiso Makwetla for this section of the program. Thank you very much again, Tsepiso.
I'm just going to stand here. I've been told that over there is above my pay grade. So it's just only for the esteemed members. So I hope you don't mind if I sit down. And thank you very much to Mr. Hatang for doing the protocol aspect of the program. Because as you know, for journalists, protocol is a double-edged sword. It's a career-limiting move if you defer to it too much, but at the same time, if you don't, you could end up misspeaking and being incarcerated, as Mr. Hatang there said. So I will thank you for observing all the protocol on my behalf. So hashtag Mandela Returns. This is the event, the beginning of day-long program. And today, this 45 minutes really is to introduce you to the reception committee and those who are influential on this particular day, on this anniversary. My job really is to introduce you to them, their thoughts, their reminiscings of those days, and to just look at where we are now, whether or not this day was all that it was set out to be. Somebody said to me that looking at 1994 and some of the events that play out in South Africa today, one has to ask themselves if this is really the punchline. So we'll get the committee to answer that call. But I just want to reflect on something that Chinese poet Lao Tzu said: those who have knowledge don't predict, those who predict don't have knowledge. And I'm wondering if some of those who were in the reception committee were prescient in some of the things that they said and did and their planning. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Vali Musa. I heard the Minister of Justice speak about the issue of the Freedom Charter. You were saying in preparation for the speech with Mr. Mandela, one of the things that he was very particular about was the wording of the Freedom Charter, staying true to it. And you had to say to him, but you know, the ANC has used more nuance, for instance, in some of the language when it comes to nationalization. And I want you to reflect, looking at this day, did Mandela, when he walked out of prison, remain the same man, just even on those policies? Mr. Musa? Is there a microphone that perhaps we can... Okay, I would have thought you would have been mic, but please, I'm going to see if I can organize a
big risk with giving a former politician a podium, which is a rare thing these days. And don't think I'm going to leave this podium quickly now. But very, very quickly on that question, I saw President Mandela with the delegation on the 9th of February. On that day, we didn't know he was going to be released. 2 days later, he didn't know either. They informed him that night, on the 9th of February. And when they informed him that he would be released on the 11th, and that they were going to put him onto an aeroplane on the early hours of the morning of the 11th and fly him to Johannesburg and take him to his home in Soweto. And that the Sunday Times would have a front page story on the Sunday that Mandela has been released and he's at home. And that's how the regime had planned it, and they thought that was a very clever thing to do. He, of course, said to them, he's not going anywhere. If that's how they want it, he's not going to leave prison. Because he will leave the way he wants to leave. And he then said on the 9th, when we'd seen him, he said when they do release him, we didn't know when that would be, he wants to walk out of here and not be taken by them anywhere. He says, you people must be at the gate to pick me up. I want to be picked up by my own people, not by them. They shouldn't take me anywhere. And secondly, I want to address the people of Cape Town and thank them for the many years that I've spent in their city and for them being hosts. So that's what happened. And then he had specific things he wanted to say, because on the 10th, when we met with the enemy, Bulelani and Saki and Trevor and a whole number of us at about 10 a.m. on the morning of the 10th, and they said Mandela would be released, everybody was given tasks. My task was to come here and to assist President Mandela in whichever way he wanted to. Basically, I had to sit and take... he was dictating his speech and I was writing it down and then running into town and having it typed up by my wife and bringing it back to him and stuff like that. But he wanted to say a few things, one of which was he wanted to say that the conditions which led to the launching of the armed struggle and Mkhonto Wesizwe have not changed. And there is no reason for the armed struggle not to continue. So he wanted to say that. He wanted to say that he's a member of the ANC, not only that, but that he's a loyal member of the ANC. He wanted to say that he is subject to the discipline of the leadership of the ANC, that he wasn't a leader. You may recall he said in his speech that leaders are elected people. And so he was not elected onto the National Executive Committee. He didn't. So he wanted to recognize the leadership. Then he wanted to also say a few things, one of which I did think was a bit strange. He wanted to say that de Klerk was a man of integrity. I said, Comrade Madiba, maybe wait for a few days before you say something of that sort. But he wasn't interested in my views, and of course he was correct. He wanted to say that, and we all know that it was a correct thing to do. And part of what he was doing the moment he walked out was not only giving leadership to his followers and to the oppressed people of this country, but giving leadership to the nation. He knew that if F.W. de Klerk and his regime crumbles unceremoniously, who do you negotiate with? And you needed to, in a sense, keep them stable until there's a proper transition to power. So, that's he had thought about all of those sorts of things. And I think if we look back, it is remarkable that he was able to avoid a situation of any suspicion that he had done a deal with the regime. That's what he wanted. He wanted to avoid that.
Allow me to jump in and then corral you along this line of thinking, because when you speak about the issue of Mr. de Klerk, the issue of integrity did arise, and he said if he disappoints us, then that's on him. And I'm raising the issue of integrity for a reason, because when you pointed out about the actual wording that he wanted to stay true of the Freedom Charter, and I'm thinking of where South Africa is today on issues such as nationalization, on issues such as land, has the ANC as a party acted with integrity? Has it stayed true to the promises made those days that President Mandela then made, wanted to appeal to majority of the people, that he said he didn't want to be rejected by, because he wanted to be the same man who walked out of prison, who went into prison walking out?
President Mandela remember that he actually rejected offers for his freedom a number of times. I mean, very few people who face a lifetime in jail or accept the offer to go and become a farmer in the Transkei. He actually rejected that. He says, I'd rather just stay in jail. And so he one of the things he was concerned about is that the enemy would say this man has sold out and therefore divide the liberation movement. And he wanted to make it absolutely clear. He was also concerned that the liberation movement went through trying times. There were those of us who were in the country being ungovernable. There was the people who were in exile, and there were people who were in prison, and all of those things. He didn't know whether this thing is going to hold together. So he wanted to say things which will hold all of this together. And if you look there, he carefully acknowledged everybody and put everybody sort of, in a sense, showed what the place is of everybody. As far as the Freedom Charter is concerned, we can spend the whole day debating what is the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter was the vision of the oppressed people in 1995 of the future. And you can then ask yourself, what is the essence of the Freedom Charter? And the very essence is stuff that at the core of the Freedom Charter is constituted in the opening words of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. It's entrenched in there forever that we will be a free country, united, non-racial, non-sexist, etc., etc. I can say without any shadow of doubt, with all the problems that we've got, the citizens of the Republic of South Africa are freer than citizens of almost any other country in the world today. We may not be happy with our leaders, we may not be happy with the economy is doing bad and all of those things, but the one thing that was at the core of the Freedom Charter, and that's why it was called the Freedom Charter, is that we will be free, and that's what we are.
All right. Mr. Vali Musa, thank you very much. And of course, I must acknowledge the viewers of SABC who would no doubt be listening to what you're saying and who let us know whether they agree with what you're saying. We'll talk about the semantics, about the wording. I saw Mr. Manuel, you look like you wanted to add something on that, but I have a question for you on that particular issue. I want to come to you, Mr. Bulelani Nguka. You said on reflection on this day in 2014 that if you had to look back, that there were things that you would change. And okay, well, I was hoping they'd give you a microphone, but let's. Okay, you have. Okay, you could sit there or you can stand.
Just that
okay, yes. You prefer to see
I don't
everybody.
want
Yes.
Vali to be the only one who's seen by the people.
You always want to be seen.
Minister, you were saying in 2014,
What
I
would
said,
you have changed?
whew, there were so many things. We were so ill prepared for the occasion. But we were very confident. We thought we knew what we were doing. I think we were bold and courageous. But little did we know what was ahead of us. We really underestimated the power of Madiba before his release. We were concerned about filling up the Grand Parade. We thought that it's very important that our people should come up in numbers and welcome Madiba. And so that was, we were preoccupied with that more than about his security and all those things. We also didn't even know where he was going to sleep, if you recall. We called Archbishop Tutu that afternoon and he was not there. We couldn't take Madiba to any hotel. So we're just not prepared for his release. So what would we change? Firstly, we had the guy was the head of our security and ex-Robben Islander. We knew nothing about controlling crowds. We had another UDF fellow who was the driver, Madiba's driver, who didn't know how to drive a VIP.
He now knows.
So there was so much. I mean, everything else that we did, it was really based just on us. We believed in ourselves. That was number one. I remember, Trevor will recall this. We received a message in the morning that Madiba was going to be released the following day. And we all assembled at Dala's house. And from there we moved to meet with Brigadier, General Willemse was the head of the correctional services at the time. And he told us that Madiba is going to be released at 3 p.m. the following day and that Madiba had referred them to the reception committee because they wanted to know what we're going to do. So our response was immediate. No, we can't decide what Madiba is going to do. We want to see. So we, from there, and he said, okay, here's a guy, his name is Brigadier Khepeno. We want you guys to liaise with him. And we said, Trevor, you be the contact point with Brigadier Khepeno. And Brigadier Khepeno said to us, President de Klerk wants to make sure nothing happens to Madiba. Please, guys, work with us. We said, thank you very much. We know what we want to do. We don't want to work with. We didn't tell him we don't want to work with you, but we said, thank you very much for your offer. We should have taken his advice. We should have taken his advice. But the nice thing is that when we left there, they agreed for us to come and see Madiba. We went to Vali's. Vali was staying in a hotel near Parliament with his girlfriend who became his wife. And all we wanted then at the time was, can we have a dog to celebrate? We did it, you know. We came here, we found Madiba in his pajamas. We said, Madiba, how could you, on your day of release, why, how can you sleep? He just laughed at us. And then we had this discussion about what was going to happen the following day. By then the word was out. Our activists were all over Cape Town. We had to organize buses. We had set up this reception committee. At that point in time, we didn't know who was responsible for transport, who was responsible for sound system. But the guys just got together that evening. I remember Cheryl and Willie and them running around trying to find, just to get buses to transport people there. So, we'll change just about everything. But I think I'm glad we went through all that.
So there were the logistics of it. Classes were forgotten, clothes had to be arranged, etc. But I want you to then now look into the political future from that vantage point. Did you ever imagine some of the things that you went through personally as a politician, that this country went through, that you were fully prepared, would you have changed some of the steps that led us to this point in our democratic trajectory?
Looking back from where we are, that's a very difficult one. In my view, I think that some people will say we attained our liberation and on the 27th of April 1994. I don't think so. I think the moment Madiba walked out of prison, the dynamics of this country changed. From that moment onwards, we co-governed this country together with the regime. If we had known before then that's what was going to happen, we would have been better prepared. And in a sense, we refused to accept the responsibility at that time of being in power because we didn't want to take responsibility for the government's failures at the time. And yet we had the responsibility of ushering this country into freedom. So those were some of the challenges.
Okay. So let's pass on the baton. Thank you very much, Mr. Nuka. Sydney Mafamadi, you were asked by Walter Sisulu at the Democratic Conference for Democratic Future Conference whether or not we are ready.
You can say I was not ready.
He asked you, are we ready for Madiba's return? And I want you to share with us what he represented at the time, what he came to represent, the life that he lived. Did he become that representation? In other words, were you politically ready?
I just forgot the dates, but I was part of a delegation which came to this house before the UDF delegation, although I was also UDF. That was a COSATU delegation which came to consult with Nelson Mandela. And he sought to take us through a document which he had written, a copy of which he sent to Lusaka, in which he was giving a sort of progress report about the discussions he was having with the government. Little did he know that we spent time discussing that document with Lusaka before we came here. Now, if you ask whether we were prepared politically, yes, we were fully prepared politically, because Oliver Tambo prepared us for those eventualities. That was, during that period, there were a lot of activities in the movement which were focused on a reflection about constitutional principles. We were beginning to project into South Africa beyond Mandela's release, beyond the unbanning of the organization, because we were taught to understand that in the final analysis, we have the primary responsibility of shaping the future of this country. So I'm saying, from that point of view, we were prepared for those eventualities, not a prediction of what happens day to day. Now, when Mandela walked out of this prison and we were watching him on TV, it was very clear to us that that turning point has arrived. History, you could see history walking in the way of the liberation movement. But we were ready because we knew that we had created a policy platform which we were then going to have to sell to the people of this country. One of the things that happened as we were preparing was a discussion about talks, about negotiations, and it was the ANC which said the shape of the negotiations table must be a round one. In other words, it must be an all-inclusive process. You can only say that if you are confident about your own position. We did not fear the involvement. On the contrary, we welcomed the involvement of everybody because we wanted to build an inclusive South Africa. So we had a policy platform that we knew would enchant the majority of the people of South Africa. Bulelani is saying we did not know whether we will fill up the parade. But it is because people were already looking up to the ANC when you talk about the future of the country. The apartheid system already had started cracking up. So I'm saying we were ready.
You're politically ready, but if you look at South Africa now, we talk about the high levels of poverty, the fact that people still don't have houses on long housing lists, the fact that people even lament that the education system, the health system under apartheid was far better than under liberated, democratized South Africa. So looking at those things, and I know what Mr. Musa was saying earlier on, that we are far better off, but were we then politically ready, looking at the advent of the challenges we had to face and where we are now?
Well, the first point to understand is that Nelson Mandela belongs to a generation which envisioned this democratic South Africa in which we live. So they said in 1955, there shall be this, there shall be that, there shall be the other. So it's very clear as to what the goal was. And if you look at what happened in the aftermath of 1994, there are many people who did not have access to electricity. There are many people who did not have houses, who now have houses. You can count. We took over at a time when this country's economy had been languishing for 17 successive years in negative growth territory. Within 1 year, it was in positive growth territory. But if you are talking about a process of democratizing a country, you must take the correct view, which says it is a permanent work in progress. It is a process in which there will be ebbs and flows, but what is good is that the benchmarks have been put on the ground. Even if there are deviations, there is clarity as to where we should be going. So the task of the moment is for us to join hands and retrace our steps. Where we went wrong, we correct ourselves and continue with this permanent work in progress.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mfumadi. So, Mr. Manuel, there's a report that when there was a discussion about these negotiations, you offered to play bad guy. And then apparently that was rebuffed because especially the black consciousness movements would say they're not really interested in negotiations. And you reportedly said, why should we be held back by people who weren't in the trenches with us? I want you to reflect on that conversation and look at the negotiations themselves. The question is, did we concede too much? There are people who compare us with the BRICS countries. They say if you look at what has been celebrated as the Lula moment, saying that he did far more in 3 years than South Africa has done in 30 years. Did we concede too much?
Thank you very much, Pisa. Good morning to all of you. I did indeed I was required to take the position of bad cop, and that was at the Conference for a Democratic Future. And as Sydney said, in the commitment to be inclusive, we also had to have views. And I think that was executed by Madiba in the way in which he saw things. You can't enter this equation allowing yourself to be buffeted by the views of others. And we weren't formally the ANC, but we were the ANC, we had views about this matter. This matter had been taken through a number of iterations. It was called the Arari Declaration. It had the full backing of the frontline states in the African Union, and we owned the process. And because we owned the process and were committed to it, it was abundantly clear that we were going to see this through. And so, I mean, all of us had lived through a period where we were there but for the grace of something, and didn't have our blood spilt along with those of a number of our comrades. So we knew pain, we knew the trauma, we knew the inside of prisons, and we needed to be resolute in how we took these matters forward. And that was that moment. But I think it's also part of a series of issues, and we learnt as we went. You see, that statement that you referred to and asked Valley about, with Madiba saying, Mr. de Klerk is a man of integrity. With everything he did, he demonstrated foresight. You need to go back into Codesa 1, where Madiba gets up and he says, Mr. de Klerk, I used to describe you as a man of integrity. And Madiba had done so on a number of occasions. Now to break, he was breaking because he had reason to break. And these things were churning through his mind all the way through. In the same way as Bulelani talks about us arriving here on the Saturday evening, Madiba in his pajamas, we're very excited. Blackie Swart was looking after Madiba in the house here. And the one thing we want to do is celebrate. And Madiba says, Blackie, give these boys a drink. But Madiba himself was cool, calm, and collected, and had churned out in his mind exactly what was going to happen the following day. And that kind of leadership is so profound. Even the day after his release, and something that Salim Mauser must take responsibility for, 4 o'clock in the morning, Madiba calls me at home and he says, Trevor, when my car was packed up yesterday, where did you put my weights? I need to exercise now. Anybody else would kind of be running around the park, celebrating something. Madiba needed the discipline in his life so that he could exercise that discipline, and he couldn't give up on it. The discipline was not something imposed by the prison authorities. It was a discipline that he internalized and allowed him to lead. And that same discipline is what you've seen at a number of key points. Look at the negotiations, Sipiso. It's not something we give a lot of attention to. When you ask whether there was a sellout, go back and look at the points. I refer to Codesa 1, but look at the point of complete breakdown after the Boipatong massacre. The African National Congress, led by Madiba, was entirely in control of that process. And if you ask about whether there was a sellout, I want to echo what Valley was saying. Look at the Constitution. Read the preamble to the Constitution. Read all of the Constitution, understand the Bill of Rights, and recognize how far that was from what the apartheid regime represented at any point in its history. And then ask what we've done with that freedom. Because if we don't take an approach to democracy and freedom that calls for ongoing renewal, we keep finding somebody else to blame. We extricate ourselves from responsibility, and that is the challenge of the president.
Mr. Manuel, the issue is if we look at the insurrection that we're seeing out there on the streets, is it not a challenge to the symbolism of 1994? The state violence in reaction to that insurrection. We've had Fees Must Fall, which somebody would have said is a black swan moment that we never would have imagined in democratic South Africa. It still goes back to whether or not about selling out, whether we conceded too much.
Look, I mean, I stand by the position that we didn't concede too much, and I can say this as one who wasn't actually involved in the constitutional negotiations myself. I was given other tasks. But I read that constitution, and I ask myself, if we had to rewrite the constitution, rewrite the values, what would we come up with? And I can't deviate from that constitution because it's core. What we've not done is to socialize the values of that constitution. And that is a transition. Because all of us were activists in communities. And suddenly, you see this point that Bulelani raises about not being prepared. Suddenly, we're taken out of the communities, and in local communities where we were involved in leadership responsibility, we're given big national responsibility. And the next layer wasn't always in position, and so that discontinuity, I think, cost us in respect to the socialization of values. So we now look back and say, but Madiba didn't declare something on fees. But history isn't made like that. History is made by one generation after the other, engaging in processes. And our responsibility is, in fact, to recognize what went wrong. And I think President Ramaphosa has said that we lived through 10 years of hell. And you can't make these things, you can't regain the steps, and you can't make up the lost time. But it's working through these kinds of issues that becomes paramount for us. And I think that part of what leadership must do is to be honest in introspection.
So let's be honest, was it an isolated 10 years of hell? Or was there a precursor to that 10 years of hell?
Look, there may have been some issues, but I think that what happened in not all of the 10 years, because you can look at this moment by moment.
Okay.
Because by 2014, the Guptas were not even an issue. And then you look at what happened thereafter. So it was non-linear, but there were major issues that impacted on the quality of life of all South Africans and what happened to our resources.
All right, thank you very much, Trevor Manuel. I think then it's apt to ask you, Veli Hofmeyer, as a former head of the Asset Forfeiture Unit, you have said we had a very strong constitution. We still have a lot to work with. So when you were adjudicating over some of those cases, looking at democratic South Africa, the extent of corruption, and comparing it with apartheid South Africa, which we were supposed to divorce ourselves from, especially economic apartheid, what is your response to that? You can come to the podium. I think we should all get a chance to shine.
I'm not sure I want to shine on this one. I think we did go through 10 very bad years. And I think the term state capture that is bandied about, in a sense, is a correct term for what happened over the last 10 years. For me, the hope for the future is that we have, I can't say we have dealt with those issues. I think we are dealing with those issues. The Zondo Commission, for me, is particularly important for us to understand what went wrong. But for me, I think the more important issue is actually, what is it that we can do better? What is it that perhaps in the writing of the Constitution, I think we were a little bit naive.
About what in particular?
For me, one example is the powers of the President to make appointments. On all of law enforcement, all DGs. And when you get a bad president, there is very little checks and balances in the process. So I think the state was captured in a sense in two ways. The one was by making bad appointments, both in law enforcement and elsewhere. But the other was also because we didn't have enough systems, strong enough systems in place in the state to make it more difficult to manipulate procurement systems and so on. So I think those problems can be dealt with. I think the Zondo Commission is very useful because it exposes what went wrong, and that enables us to start grappling with what it is we can do to prevent it from.
If constitutionalism was a problem within those 10 years, and yet we still say we have amongst the best constitutions in the world, would the Constitution then not be the problem? Because there are those who say that maybe the Constitution is written for the minority.
I don't think the Constitution itself is a problem. I think over the many trials and tribulations that we've been through, the Constitution has served us pretty well. I think the one area that we should look at in terms of the Constitution is the fairly unlimited powers of the President to make appointments, whether it's in every department of state, in law enforcement and so on. So I think it is important that we start debating that issue and say, what is it that we can perhaps improve on in the Constitution to make what has happened more difficult to happen next time?
What about the role of established capital? It's been said that, for instance, at a time when we're at the TRC, and they should have played their role, not only in compensation, but acknowledging what they did to the majority of South Africa. If you look at the mines, for instance, doesn't that play a role that we didn't include, we didn't foresee that in building our constitution?
I think we did try and anticipate some of those issues, but I think it is also important to understand that in many ways we didn't have a situation where there was a war and there was a winner that took over the country. I think the Constitution came out of a process of trying to take our country out of a war and find a solution that we can live with together for the future.
Right. Thank you very much, Willie Hofmeyer. Saki Makozoma, you were in charge of media at the time, and you said one of the challenges was that it was a big international story, all eyes were on Cape Town, and you had to make sure that the world understood that as an organization, you were ready, able to take over from the apartheid government, the establishment. Mr. Hofmeyer here talks about the war, and I want to look at the war within, and I'm talking about the ANC government. This is something that you would know very well, being on the business front, but also being within the party. The battle for resources is being, many have said, because you had a black majority that was denied for so long, and then you made a few people rich who weren't really given real power. Do you think the image that we portrayed on the day of Mandela's return and the image we portrayed thereafter, we've been talking about the corruption, we've been talking about the infighting within the ANC as a party, was that a faulty image? Did we deceive the world?
I don't think that we deceived the world, neither did we deceive ourselves. We had aspirations. And I think that as human beings, if we don't have aspirations, we'll never achieve anything. And therefore, I think Sydney was correct in saying that, in as much as we was saying we're not prepared for the day, we were prepared for the future. And the references to the CDF, or the Conference for the Democratic Future, is important because that happened in 1989, and there we were trying to socialize the political landscape beyond the UDF, ANC, Congress alliance into understanding the trajectory of the country as it was shaped by the Arari Declaration, because we had seen what had happened in the Namibians. And I remember this being said many times, that the Namibians found themselves in a situation where Resolution 345 created a situation where other people decided the future of the people of Namibia and they were out of the room. We wanted to be sure that does not happen to us. That as the leadership of the people of South Africa at that time, we had to make sure that whatever evolution took place politically, it was of our own making. And the PEC had a slogan in the past about Africans have got a right to rule themselves or misrule themselves. So in the end, we were very clear on one thing. These are the aspirations of our people. They're contained in the Freedom Charter. We have to modernize that and take that into the context of where we were. We had to make sure that everybody, as much as possible, is happy with the direction that the country was going. But at the same time, we're not going to wait for people who wanted international mediation or whatever other external intervention that they wanted. So, no, we didn't lie to ourselves. The fact of the matter, though, is that one generation, which is the Mandela generation, created the vision. Our generation received that vision and tried to implement it to the best of our ability. What will happen in successive generations is the matter of the people of South Africa.
So what
and I go back to the issue that has been raised, the conscientization of our people to understand the importance of unity, whether in a political party, but as a country and as a nation as well.
So what happened? We've seen the fissures, there's cope, we saw splinter groups within even the unions, ideological differences even on policy, how to approach it, the redistribution. What happened then?
I think you should understand the concept of a national liberation movement. The concept of a national liberation movement is bringing together all strands of society to a common purpose at a common time for a common objective. It is natural, in my view, that the evolution will get to a point where there will be different points of view, where there will be different approaches, either in politics or in the economy and in the problems that face our country. So I don't think that we should look at these things as abnormalities or anomalies or idiosyncrasies, whatever word you want to use. Because ultimately, the unity that we maintained to topple the apartheid regime, we maintained.
Okay, so politics naturally don't remain static.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Saki. Mike Kozoma. So I think it's a good springboard then to talk about the day-to-day experience of South Africans following that moment. Dr. Sonto, as I said, you were the driver. You are one of those who made sacrifices along many of your comrades. One would have said you would have expected some recognition, some others say reward. And yet you still struggled. You were, some said, a victim of bureaucracy. Because you couldn't get your pension, you had to argue with the Special Pensions Appeal Board to draw a pension. What is that experience for you like? For somebody who then, when you had that vision, you were part of the reception committee, you had a dream, and this is the South Africa you are given.
The generation of Mandela, our generation, never struggled to be rewarded. Yet when opportunities presented themselves, we had to benefit from those opportunities as well. It is true that I had and I still have altercations with the Special Pensions Appeals Board. I appealed for more years of service in the struggle. And the response that I got from them was to reject the appeal and set aside the special pension that I was already receiving for, amongst others, these following reasons. One, in South Africa, there's no prison that claims to have ever locked you up. That is the first reason. And I laughed at it when insensitive people would say such a thing. For many years I've been here. I know sections of Victor Verster. A and B. I know them. Even Kulugutu. I've been to Paulsmoor. If Ngonde was here, he would say that when we first met Utatu Sulu, Utatu Mlange, Utatu Mhlaba, and Utatu Kathrada, we were under Section 29 in Paulsmoor. Yet there are people who are saying in this country, they have made a thorough research and found no prison that has ever incarcerated me. Secondly, they say there's no court that claims that I have ever appeared before it. I've appeared in the Western Cape in 4 courts, let alone that I was not convicted.
I appeared in Muizenberg, Bishop Lavis, Langa, and even Paarl. But there are people who were saying, no courts in South Africa. I'm giving you but a few. And because of that, they took away my right to receive a pension and even rejected my appeal. That's what the Special Pensions Board do to people, not only me, but to many other people. It's a pity. They have no face. You can't say it's Trevor Manuel. You can't say it's Salim Mauser because you don't know them. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. That's not good. And I think it's just to bring to the fore pretty much the theme of today, the return of Utata Madiba to the everyday life of the promise that was made to the people of South Africa, that liberation, that freedom. And you'll hear more about that theme, about whether or not we are indeed free or whether we ourselves are locked in our own prisons and what is the reason for those prisons and what are those prisons. It's a pity that we couldn't engage more of you on this issue, but I would like you to please give a very warm round of applause to members of the reception committee. Thank you very much to all of you, and I think I'd give it back to you, Sello Hatang. Unfortunately, it seems that we have run out of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sepiso, and I want to thank all the members. Of course, there's a few more people who could have said something, such as Benny Gould, who's sitting here, Ntadem Kachwa, who could have told us more about moral regeneration and where we are as a country. So Ntate Mauser, thank you so much again, and we've just run out of time. I thought as we close, we need to just reflect on a couple of things before we then walk across to the other side. Also among us is Ntate Jack Swart, who's sitting there, who was with Madiba here for 14 months. And I thought I should give you 3 anecdotes from him, his stories about Madiba in this house. One was Madiba never liked anything being killed. So he would say to him, Jack, no, don't kill it. And if there's, he found a spider, he would then just cover it with a towel and say to him, Jack, in the morning, there's a spider there. Can you set it free? So Jack then has to throw it over the fence so that it's set free. But of course, that spider will be back again tomorrow. And it's a recurring thing of these spiders. So Jack then took a drastic decision about these spiders. So Madiba would cover it, and he said, no, there's a spider there. Jack goes out, he looks if Madiba is there, puts it down, and just quickly does what needs to be done with that. And then there was a mouse also in the house, which Madiba had said to him, no, there's a mouse in the house. Jack then went and got the trap, killed the mouse. Madiba then didn't realize that mouse was gone. He saw another mouse. There's a note, in fact, in the house. Our friend, mouse is back. Because Madiba thought that mouse is back. Meanwhile, it's the ancestor who was back. But I could go on and on, but the swimming pool that you see here, I heard someone asking, could Madiba swim? Or did Madiba swim? Because we assume that he could. Jack says, no, Madiba actually never swam. He walked in the pool, and he thought he was swimming. So Madiba would walk, and then he says, puts his head down, and he walks, and that was Madiba's version of swimming. So I want to go back to the words of the Deputy Minister, that we owe it to Madiba to look after this house, that the 4 partners that she identified need to get together. The Minister is here, and Minister knows that we have to collaborate to ensure that we make sure that this house doesn't fall into disrepair. When we came here, there's someone who actually looks after with his family. He comes here every weekend to come and clean the house. So we find it in the state because he takes out his time to come and clean the house. would like to again appeal to the Minister and the two ministers here present, as the Deputy Minister indicated, that we all work together to make sure that it doesn't fall into disrepair. I want to welcome you again, Minister. As we close, I thought I should just note that the relationship that Madiba had with Jack is a relationship that reminds us that we all as South Africans, we need to come together in 2020 in the search for sustainable solutions to intractable problems that we face. We're coming together at a time when there's re-emergence of apartheid denialism. That some in our country are now saying it was never a crime against humanity. And they are saying it was just black-on-black violence. I think it's a time that we should then be, with no doubt in our minds, making sure that they know their place in terms of how it will always be a crime against humanity, that they armed those black people to go kill fellow black people. And they paid them to do so. And I think that's what we need to also be thinking about as we think about the South African one we're dreaming of. That we shouldn't stop and wait for those who wronged South Africa's state capture to recover. Because at the moment they are being allowed to recover. They're giving us hour-long interviews to explain. It's better that they explain those things to the court. And I'm hoping that these processes will run as quickly as possible so that they are not allowed to recover from what's happening now. When I saw that Dennis Goldberg yesterday, he noted that what happened, Madiba said when he gave the speech, he said, I give the remaining years of my life to you, the people, as a servant, your servant, not as a prophet. And he said, Madiba understood at that moment that politics was too important to be left to politicians. And it's important that politicians not be trusted with politics alone. Because it's the trust of politicians with politics, and we let them be, that leads us to stuff that happened in the last 9 years. That we should continue to center the people, that we take responsibility for the country that we want, but that we should stop the paralysis of leadership that we find across all the structures of society. That we've become insensitive people. And that is on to your story. Is really one of those that is touching, but not unique to what South Africans go through. I want to reflect on Mam Winnie, who Ntate Mpumlwana called the ancestor of active citizenship. When I called her after Palesa Madiba, the UJ student who disappeared, went to the family to find out what had happened. And the brother went to the police station. This after 6 months or so of their child had disappeared. The officer looked at him, Minister, and said, well, all these files that you see here, Minister Mteto was the Minister of Police at the time. So he said to him, all these files that you're looking at are of people who have disappeared. In other words, join the queue. And we have become that insensitive. And I then went to Mamwini and said, there's a crisis here. This family is in pain. And she then called Minister Mteto and said, something has to be done. And the police are capable of doing something. Because in no time, they found the remains of Palesa. Because there was pressure that was brought to bear by Mamwini through the minister for that to happen. Why should you know someone for you to get access to justice? Why should you know someone for you to get access to pension? Why should we have our people still have to make choices that they have to make instead of getting a library, which is what happened when the Nelson Mandela Foundation was trying to build a library in Limpopo. And we were told, no, actually the principal said, no, we don't need a library, we need toilets. We're giving our people two choices that are too bad to make. We have to stop at some point and not be insensitive. But we also live in a country which is very hopeful, a country that is still full of aspirations, I'd say, in Tatemakozom. We are also meeting at a time when we are victorious in terms of the rugby. We are the champions of the world. Miss Universe. We are the crown. We're wearing that crown through Zozi. But we also are the African netball champions. And of course, who will forget that Kaizer Chiefs is top of the world. So, may I just, on that very important note,
I hope I'm sitting with the right people.
thank you very much, Minister. Now, I thought I should just thank the Department of Correctional Services and particularly the Minister. I want to congratulate the Minister on our behalf on your little boy who was born a few days ago. Congratulations. So I called the Minister, I was harassing him, and at some point he said, dude, I'm at the hospital. My wife is about to give a birth. So I said, oh, sorry. He said, no, but I'll be there. So, and he is here indeed. So thank you very much, Minister. Department of Sport, Arts and Culture and Recreation, both the Minister and Deputy Minister, thank you very much. When I called the Minister about 6 months ago, he said, we are on board and we'll make sure that this happens. So your commitment to us is always lauded. So thank you very much. Ntate Goldberg also said I should thank you for the kind of work that you continue to do with him and others in terms of funding initiatives that help foundations like his to do the work that he does. Fred Drakensdale Correctional Facility, Hansadal Foundation, members of the media, Nelson Mandela Foundation staff who worked tirelessly. I think 2 of them actually didn't sleep last night. They were here to make sure that everything works out as it did. So I'm forever grateful to the staff of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Jack will forever be grateful to you because you continue to just stand up and share the stories from this house. I want to now close by saying that we're going to get into cars from here. There will be a few buses that will be stationed outside. Clive wanted to... Oh, sorry, buses. So you're not to go back to your cars. If we could get into the buses that are here and we go to the statue at the gate for a symbolic wreath laying and also a photograph that will be taken, then we all move to the City Hall in Cape Town. Thank you so much for being here this morning and looking forward to a very interesting day ahead. When you get there, there's a Nobel laureate who will be speaking, Mayor Lima Bowie from Liberia. And then after her speech, she will be talking about prisons of Africa, the prisons both figurative and literal. And then she'll be followed by the president who will then address us at the Grand Parade. Thank you very much.
But it is futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government who is required.